We were on Main Street. I stopped and he stopped. I reached into my pocket and brought out a £1 coin, held it up and said, "Catch with one hand, Billy, and you can keep it." Billy smiled, positioned himself to catch and said, "Go ahead." I threw the coin and Billy caught it with his right hand, his smile beaming happiness. I winked, made a shake of the head to indicate admiration at his dexterity, and walked on. I had the information I wanted.
Hello, I'm Donna Traynor, and I've come to the town of Larne in Northern Ireland to meet that man who said he had all the information he wanted. In his autobiography, he recounts a plan to commit a crime so vicious it made headline news. His name is Cecil Meneilly.
My name is Cecil Meneilly. I was born and bred in Larne. Never left it, always lived in Larne. I had a rough upbringing, that's putting it mildly, and my main concern when I was growing up was to stay sane, avoid pain and hurt and terror and fear. One of my problems was my violence, and I realised after a long period of time that there was really nothing wrong with society and with the people around me. But there was something very wrong with me.
Now in his 70s, Cecil Meneilly tries to explain why he was such a violent young man. In October 1982, he carried out a brutal attack that shocked his local community and beyond. He writes about it in his autobiography, Walk a Crooked Mile, The Anatomy of a Psychopath.
When I went to jail for this really terrible crime for which I still feel embarrassment and shame. I was studied for 18 months by 2 psychiatrists, and the psychiatrist who represented me in court, she said that I was not a psychopath, that one of my problems was I was a bit too complicated. Let's put it no blunter than that. But my diagnosis is a layman's diagnosis, and you shouldn't think for a moment that this is a clinical diagnosis, because it's not, because I'm not qualified to say whether I'm clinically, professionally speaking, a psychopath or not. And I'm not qualified to say that anybody else is or isn't.
But is that a label that you give yourself?
It's a label that I give myself because the classic definition of a psychopath is somebody who has no care or thought or feelings for the suffering of another person, particularly if he's causing that suffering. And my experience was complicated by the fact that I did hurt people, for which obviously I'm ashamed now, but at the time I believed that it was right to hurt people. Like if I fell out with someone, if somebody attacked me, for instance, I believed I was right to violently defend myself. And in some cases, because I happen to be quite good at that, it could go a little too far and I would overreact, and the consequences would be not good.
From the outside, Cecil Meneilly's family life looked like any other in the 1950s. But he remembers a childhood full of fear. He says behind closed doors and from an early age, he was mistreated and abused by his parents.
My father made an admission years later in the presence of others that I was subsequently glad of, as it made it easier to tell what had happened in general without being suspected of exaggeration. He admitted that when I was 5 or 6 years old, instead of throwing away the cot I'd slept in as a toddler, they converted it into a cage by putting chicken wire over the top, and this was what they kept me in. One of the consequences of this was that since I couldn't get out to go to the toilet, I'd soil myself and wipe the excrement on the wall against which the cot sat. I was beaten by my father from when I was about 5 years old, and I actually began at times to worry to myself, what will happen if this doesn't stop? Because I couldn't take it. When I was being beaten by my father, I learned early on that it was no good screaming for mercy, and instead learned to growl and roar as a way of combating the pain. Sometimes after a particularly long beating, I'd sit staring at the pattern in the wallpaper for days. This quietness, obviously the desired effect. He'd nearly always use a belt, but if one wasn't handy, he'd pick up whatever was lying about. Often one of a number of flexible sticks kept lying about for the purpose. Years later, when I thought about it, it always reminded me of an alcoholic who couldn't wait for his first drink. He always seemed to be in such a hurry.
How did you manage in school? Did you have friends? Or was that pain that you were talking about manifest itself in you being a bully in school?
No, it wasn't. Well, I don't think it was a bully. Nobody's going to admit that. But what happened in school was I could interact with other children, my peer group, if you like, because it wasn't children who were beating me. It was adults who were beating me, and as I saw, being bad to me. So what happened was I could interact without any difficulty with friends of my own age, 5 or 6 or whenever it may be. But any adult that spoke to me, I literally couldn't hear what they were saying, or at least couldn't understand what they were saying. And I was so nervous and frightened that I would stop breathing and look at the floor. And that would enrage the teachers or whoever it might be. They couldn't understand. God bless them. And, how are they supposed to know? But that was how I went through my early childhood. Unable to communicate in any way with any adult, but quite okay with my peer group. I could see other people interacting with their parents, for instance, and they would smile, and their parents would smile back, and I would be amazed. Wow, that looks like something you could only get in heaven. That looks like a paradisical experience. Because whenever I was in my house, this is an odd fact, but I can never remember up until the age, I think, of 10 or 11, ever having a conversation with an adult. Certainly never with any member of my immediate family, my mother, my father. Never had a conversation. And the other thing that always struck me was, from my earliest memory of the beatings that I used to get from my father, to this day, I can never ever remember what any of I'm laughing, but what any of the beatings was for. I can never remember what triggered them. It would usually start, but my mother would start screaming and shouting and pointing at me, and then my father would take his belt off or reach for a stick. And that's all I knew, that whenever he came home and this scene started, that I would run into a corner and get a beating, and that was it. And
did that continue all the way through your younger years and right through your teenage years?
No, until I was roughly 12 or 13. From the age of 5 until I was 12 or 13. After that, my father began to get the idea probably that I wouldn't be safe. Maybe I would turn on him. Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, from memory, I can't be precise in the dates. Obviously, I don't keep a diary of all these things. But from the age of 5 until 11 or 12, roughly speaking, I was beaten on a regular basis and terrorised. And that's the result was that in school I couldn't learn anything because I couldn't understand anything that an adult said to me. And when an adult come near me, I would stop breathing, and I would sweat. One of the things I remember is the drip, 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 drip of sweat off my chin if anybody was near me, if it was an adult near me. So in that environment, obviously I couldn't pass 11 plus, couldn't get in, couldn't understand anything at all.
And therefore, did you cause trouble in school?
Didn't actually get into very many fights. I was quiet, and I just got along with my peers. And not very colourful, if people are looking for colour in my story, but at that part of my life, I was just a subdued person who was frightened of violence and who was ultra nervous if an adult was near, because I didn't know how to look at them. I can remember that whenever my mother looked at me, she would sneer at me and maybe slap me in the face. So I learned that when my mother was talking to me, I looked at my feet and I stopped breathing because I was frightened. What happened in my late teens, however, was that this lack of fear of pain and the ability to rage against it, as I became passed through puberty and became what you're supposed to be, a man in your late teens, instead of a personality and a healthy character who could interact with other people, if I had problems with people, that rage began to come out and spill over, not just against an internal fight against pain, But that would spill over into my relationships with people. And of course, something very unfortunately happened to me. I got a job as a bouncer, a doorman. And that was an unfortunate development because whenever that rage spilled over in the course of me doing my job, that wasn't good. I began to slowly realise that there was something terribly wrong with me and my life. And that realisation grew to full-blown realisation of almost all the main elements of my sickness when I was in my late teens. And then that grew and grew then, and my troubles grew and grew until it came to a kind of, I'll not say a catharsis, but it came to a head with it where I couldn't control the violence any longer.
Why did you choose to be a bouncer? Was there a particular reason behind that?
Lots of men, most young men, if you asked them, would you like to be a policeman? A lot of them would say yes. And the obvious reason is that a policeman has power, authority, and these are nice things. By the same token, if you asked a similar cohort of people, young men in particular, who've got virility, they're just coming into manhood and they're looking for outlets for their virility and they see themselves as tough guys. You know, young men watch action movies where people get killed. Women watch, films where dogs are adopted. And so we're different in that fundamental sense. But if you ask a lot of young men, would you like to become a bouncer, even for a little while? Say you were found to be good at it. Would you like to become a bouncer? I guarantee a lot of them would say, yes, that would be a great experience, because it would answer to a need that they have to express themselves, their manhood, through authority, through violence, in the case of being a bouncer. So that was the attraction for me, and you could say it was a weakness. It appealed to my ego to have authority. Because one of the problems I had was, I always like to say there's three kinds of relationship. There's a relationship where you're okay and I'm not okay. And that was my relationship, because everybody was bad to me and I had no self-confidence. The other sort of relationship is the opposite, where I'm okay and you're not okay. And that's where I'm a bully and I bully you and you're the victim. But the third relationship is the one that really is good for you and good for society. And that's a relationship where I'm okay and you're okay. And that's a balanced, healthy relationship. Now, I couldn't have that because I was so messed up. I mean, we don't even have to go there. It can be applied from just half of what I've said, that I was a really mixed up person. So obviously that appealed to me, because I could be on the, I don't think I was a bully ever, but I could be certainly on the power, authority side of all the relationships where I would interact with the public, because I would be an authority.
Were you violent towards people as a bouncer?
I would claim not gratuitously. But the problem arose where I had to use violence. For instance, I was attacked by a group of 15 people one night, and I had to use really extreme violence, because I think they were trying, well, it seemed to me that they were trying to kill me. And that resulted in an awful lot of, I think there was 3 or 4 ambulances had to come to pick up the pieces. And I was questioned by the police. And they said, why were you so violent? And I said, I thought they were trying to kill me. There was a crowd. I only learned later on that there were 15, 3 women and 12 men. But according to the staff, I just went completely, I don't know how you would describe it, commando, and was chopping people down, and extreme violence. Now, the danger there, I understand, is to say, well, that's okay. And it may be okay for an average person to defend himself with violence and go too far. He can be forgiven. Problem is, with me, I was really hiding from other people the fact that I was really quite sick, and that this violence was something more than just an outlet for me. It was like almost I could become the person that I thought I should have been. It was like you got a kind of visceral freedom from the mental oppression that you'd been living under really all your life. And suddenly it was like you felt a power which was a result of some kind of freedom which you could only get by expressing this extreme violence. Now that's a problem. And that was an indication for me that, yep, things are not going good and you have to look at changing, you know.
We've come to a part of Larne which is significant in your story and the build-up to the violent crime that you committed. Tell me what happened here.
This is where I met the victim of my crime for the last time before the terrible event itself. And the purpose of meeting him was to offer him the chance to earn £1 if he could catch it with one hand. And he agreed. So I threw the coin, he caught it with his right hand, and I had the information then that I needed.
And what was that information? So
that he was right-handed. I arrived at Billy's apartment carrying a bag of equipment, rope, hacksaw and surgical gloves. There were several people inside and they had the door barricaded. And maybe it was something in the way I knocked or communicated in the sound of my footsteps, or of course the way I broke the door down, but it was obvious they had an idea what was coming, for we were 3 stories up and the last of them were jumping out windows into the dark when I finally got in. I did something which to this day I have profound shame, because the person that I injured seriously was more or less innocent. He just happened to be there whenever this violence in me spilled over and I couldn't control it. He just happened to be there.
What did you do?
I cut his hand off with a hacksaw, tied him down, cut his hand off with a hacksaw. Before starting, I knocked him out with a blow to the jaw, ostensibly to spare him the trauma of being conscious during the ordeal, in reality for 2 quite other reasons. One, so I could claim this supposed act of mercy as mitigation should he be caught, and 2, so his blood pressure would be lowered and he'd be less likely to bleed to death before I could get an ambulance to him. So, having tied him and knocked him unconscious, I cut off his right hand with the hacksaw, fixed a rope tourniquet above the stump to limit blood loss, then untied him and waited till he woke up.
So it was premeditated,
Yes.
It wasn't, you weren't on drink or drugs at the time?
No, I wasn't on drink or drugs.
So what was it in that plan? Why did you pick him and why did you inflict that awful violent attack on Billy as you did with the hacksaw?
To me, it was the ultimate expression of unloading this kind of cruel violence, that it was almost like a heroin addict, that I had to get another fix. But in my case, to this day, I find it really not easy, you probably can tell, not easy to talk about because it was premeditated. And in that sense, that was an extra dimension of sickness, which it took me years to come to terms with that. I mean, if I could speak to Billy now and he was in heaven, I would say, Billy, I'm explaining what I did, but please don't think that I'm using this and making any sort of an excuse, because I will always be ashamed of what I've done. But I believe that it's right and necessary, certainly for my family, for instance, for me to be open to talk about the reality of what happened. Now, obviously, some people might think, well, Cecil's very subtly trying to put across an excuse of some sort. He's trying to say that this was a clinical illness and therefore that might be some kind of excuse or whatever. But I would like to state that that's not an excuse. And as I alluded to before, the fact that I planned this tells you that there can be no excuse for it. And that's one of the problems I have and always have had coming to terms with, in particular, this crime that I committed. As I say, some of the others, were in response to violence, even though it was in the context of being a bouncer. And I shouldn't have been a bouncer in the first place, obviously. That was not good for me.
Take me back again. Why did you pick Billy?
I picked Billy because, and again, this is another part of the sickness. One of the things that I always sensed was that there had to be a moral reason for what I did. This is one of the aspects of my sickness, that I needed to be violent, but I needed an excuse. I needed a pretext so that I could feel okay about it. And that pretext was the fact that Billy had stolen from my mother, and I had confronted him, and he told me to go away. He wasn't interested. And so I used that as a false pretext, and that was why Billy was the victim, because I needed to feel okay. It's a kind of moral weakness in me that I wasn't the totally inhuman person, because I did have feelings. I did have that, as I saw it then, a weakness, that I needed to have a sense that I was not somehow right, but that I had some sort of excuse, because I realised just that I wasn't able to go right to the extreme of psychopathy and simply do something out of the blue for nothing.
And yet,
it's a complicated story, I know.
I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist, but I'm just thinking of the attack on this man, Billy, and your decision as part of the plan to use a hacksaw to cut off his hand. Why be so violent?
It was part of my ego, because no matter how sick a person is, nobody turns into simply a wild animal and kills people for nothing. All sick people have complicated psychologies, and a part of that is very often a need for a moral reason for doing something, because it makes the person feel okay about what he's doing. The ultimate example of that is a positive feedback where you can kill a person you've never met in war because you're doing it for your country. That's the ultimate okay for what you're doing. What I was doing I knew was wrong, but I still needed some comfort. I still needed some something that I could say to myself, well, I did warn him, he did steal. Now, that obviously that's sick, but when you're a sick person, you're grasping for moral straws because you can't bring yourself to do. You're almost ashamed. Your ego won't let you do something for no reason at all. You have to think, yeah, I've got a reason for what I'm doing. From the phone box, I dialed 999 and asked for an ambulance. Told the operator someone had had his hand cut off and was bleeding to death. Gave the address, then got back in the car and was driven home. In the house, I went through the same late routine as normal. Cup of tea, listening to music, then reading for an hour before going to sleep. One of the disturbing things about me, and a lot of people have told me this, who I've at some point fallen out with, is that if I fell out with you, or if I had any reason at all to believe that you were any sort of a danger to me, my most immediate concern would be to put you at ease. I don't have to say why. It's obvious. So that when I came for you, you would open the door and see your smiling friend, you see, and you would have no defence. To me, that looking back, that's one of the things that I find, if I knew someone who was thinking like that, I would avoid them. In other words, I would avoid me.
It sounds as if it's all part of controlling, having the plan and control. Did you want to get caught? Did you want to end up in prison? Was that part of the plan?
Looking back on it, at the time I wasn't aware of that, but looking back on it, I could see that may have been an unconscious reason. Because one of the things that anybody in the state I was in, one of the things that they realise is that in life, just like a fever, it comes to a crossroads, We either go one way or the other. And what I was looking for, I think, looking back on it, was a kind of cathartic experience.
Billy, whose hand was cut off with the hacksaw, survived the attack. His abuser, Cecil Meneilly, was arrested. And after admitting what he'd done, he was sent to jail. Now, Northern Ireland at that time was going through a period of conflict known as the Troubles. So Cecil Meneilly was put in a cell on the same wing as paramilitary prisoners.
Winning the polls and going to jail the first time have one thing in common. For the first few mornings you wake with a brutally vivid sense of rediscovery and say to yourself, oh my God, it's true. There's an old saying, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So I was a sick person, like a one-eyed man outside in normal society. But in jail I was king because I came into jail already having lived my whole life in a mental prison. So, for instance, whenever I beat somebody up in jail, I would say, right, let's go to the boards. I would actually preempt the orders of the prison officers.
And what were the boards?
The boards were the solitary confinement. They're called the boards because all you get after the mattress is taken out, your bedding is taken out in the morning, all that's left in the cell are two boards that stick out of the wall, one to sit on and one to eat off. But they don't come out far enough to rest on. So you either lie on the ground, which is cold and damp, or you walk about all day. And that was the boards. So
you beat people up in prison as
yeah,
well?
Mm-hmm.
A prison officer? Are you seriously injured? A prison officer?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was that for? Was that
control?
That was you reacting against this regime? Was it?
Yeah, control.
Did you think you had control when you were actually in there, even mental control of being in prison?
My rule in these circumstances is that to be in control is really to be in control of yourself, to be in control of your environment or the people in the environment. It's really all about being in control of yourself. Because, for instance, even if you're not physically able to control people, you can always realise that and back off and do something devious like, I don't know, poison them or something, you know. But the thing for me was control, and it started with self-control.
So when you were in jail and you had committed that violent assault on your victim, mm-hmm. Billy, mm-hmm. how did the other prisoners react to you?
There was a mixture. Obviously, you're going to get a mixture. The smart people saw that I was, a guy who was going to work in with the system, and that if they treated me okay, I would treat them okay. And I got along with a surprisingly large proportion of them. Now, there's always going to be people who make a mistake, and that's where the problems arose.
They make a mistake?
Very good.
What sort of mistake did they make in your eyes?
Well, in one occasion, I think I put it in the book, where I was in solitary confinement. And in solitary confinement, you're not allowed to talk to anybody. But anyway, the door happened to be open, and there was these orderlies who were paramilitaries, and one of them was a member of a paramilitary group. And I says, do you have the time there, mate? And he turned round, I'll not curse on camera, but he turned round and he told me to go F myself. And I says, sorry? And he says, are you deaf? He didn't know who I was, that I was a lunatic, obviously. And then he threatened to have me kneecapped. So I said to him, can I ask you a question? And he said, yeah, what is it? And I said, are you mentally ill? And he says, what are you talking about? What do you mean am I mentally ill? And I said, because I have to know whether you're mentally ill or not, so that I can know whether to give you a bye or hurt you. And at that point, I saw a realisation in his head, and then he cursed again and doubled down on the threat that he was going to have me kneecapped, you see. Now, how you were going to kneecap me in jail, I don't know. As far as I know, they don't have guns. At that point, I hit him, and he was carted off to hospital.
When you were in the cell, or in solitary confinement for that matter, but when you were in the cell, Did you think about what you had done to your victim?
Yeah.
And what were the thoughts going through your head when you were in prison about what you had done on your victim?
This is where it gets really complicated, because in normal society, which I'm a part of now, it's a source of unalloyed shame. If the subject comes up, I'm not easy with it, and I'll explain myself, but it is, you can probably tell, like, that it's a stressful thing for me, because I am still ashamed of that. But here's the complicating factor. In jail, even prison officers, and certainly paramilitaries, they think this is a great thing. As soon as I went in, the paramilitaries came to me and said, shook my hand and slapped my back and told me I'd done the right thing, and they were proud of me, and it's incredible. So you see that there's...
Surely not prison officers.
They didn't do it overtly. It wasn't a verbal thing. But I could tell from my interaction that whenever this subject came up, they would show respect.
Was that because they were afraid of you?
No, it was because every man believes that there's a power in him. You know, the idea of being a man, you understand where the word virtue comes from? You know, ver means in German and in Latin, it means man. So you get the same word from that, virility. Virile, manly strength. Now here's the other thing. Another word you get from that root is virtue. And they saw that. And again, it was because I had this patina, this, for me, I understood it was only a pretense. It was part of my sickness. But this idea that this person had stolen from my mother and had been warned, they went with that narrative. And I could see that some of them admired me. And I found that disturbing, actually.
How many years did you spend in prison?
Just under 4. I got 5 years, and with full remission, that's you do 2.5 to get out. But of course, I went in and started to hit people and be a terrible nuisance.
You had injured the prison officer, and
yeah.
You had hit a prisoner
several
as
people.
well.
I had hit several people. When I came out of prison, I was not in any sense healed, and continued all the violent and deceitful strategies I'd employed for years through my elaborate campaign of defence against reality.
When you left prison, what was your intention then? What were you going to do? What job were you going to get? How did it affect you at all? Perhaps not. Maybe you were the same man going in as you were coming out.
You're very perceptive, because my state of mind coming out of prison was changed, was strengthened actually, but not in entirely a good way, because my experience of jail had taught me that yes, strength will protect you, so therefore it's a virtue. I didn't really turn the corner, and I don't pretend that I could have turned the corner in any way if I hadn't met the greatest person in my life, my wife Gwen. She helped me grow up in all sorts of ways. She helped me become what I am today, which I claim, I mean, obviously this isn't me making a claim, a good citizen, a person who has raised 3 children without ever putting their hand on them. I've never hit my wife. She put up with me. She could see something in me that was worth fighting for, I believe. And subsequent history proves her right, I would claim, because I abhor violence now. I am ashamed of what I've done. Sorry, the prison officer that I injured as soon as I went into jail to try and establish this control, if you like, I met that man outside shortly after I got out of jail. And the first thing I did was I says, I'm sorry for what happened. And he was amazed, because he said to me, he says, I've never had a prisoner come out and be so straight with me But he could tell that I was genuine, because that prison officer was an exemplary man, a family man. I mean, you've met this man, you would love him. He was a strong man too, and a good character. So I was ashamed of having done that. And whenever I met him, I thought to myself, well, I'll do this for me, for my family, for him, for everybody, and hopefully this is part of my healing, to admit that I was wrong and to apologise. And he was amazed, and he says that's great. And he says, I've never met anything like that in my life.
So you apologised and you said sorry to him. Was that after you had met your wife, or was that immediately after the prison sentence?
That was after I'd met my wife. So you can see that I admit that possibly even that...
Was that quite soon after you left prison that you met Gwen?
Yeah, within a few months. Yeah, and that was my lucky break in a way, because I don't pretend that had I not met my wife that I would have been okay and I would have recovered. The chances are, if you ask me, that I would have been, I don't know, shot, killed, or otherwise got rid of, because it was a basic pain in the neck, both to the police and to everybody around me, you know. So anyway, that's...
How did you meet Gwen?
I met her... Gwen was having a drink with a couple of friends at her house. She lived in a flat, and I happened to be with one of the people, and we got on along so well that obviously just things snowballed from then. Yeah, we sort of clicked. My wife is very, very smart, and I love her. It's one of the many things I love about her.
And how has that changed you? And I'm just thinking back to the beginning when you say you describe yourself as a psychopath, or you have had psychopathic tendencies. Has it actually changed you inside, being her husband?
Yes.
And can that actually happen?
Well, it happened to me, and since I'm really, in many respects, a very ordinary person, in extraordinary circumstances, but in many respects, I'm a very ordinary person. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. Anybody, I believe, can be redeemed by the love of a good woman. Because one thing it taught me was that, remember we were talking about virtue as a manly quality, but I learned that virtue can be a womanly quality too, and one of the greatest. And that is the grace of understanding and the heart to devote your life to making of someone who was a mess, an embarrassment to himself and a disgrace, to make of that person a good father, a good husband and a good citizen. Which now I'm claiming that. I mean, you might talk to one of my children and they might say, woof, what's he talking about? But anyway, I have raised these children without hitting any of them. And, you know, if someone was to say to me, Cecil, you say this and that, you say that you have changed and that you're a good person now, how can we believe you? Well, what I would say is, well, it's quite simple. Go and meet one of my children, and then come back and ask me that question again. And you'll not ask me because you'll already know the answer.
Have you ever been worried, though, after meeting Gwen and having children, have you ever worried in yourself that you could harm someone again in that vicious, heinous way because you did have that capability to do that?
The answer is no. In fact, it's like an inoculation. I've been through all that and know what it is, and I know how unfruitful and stupid and sick it is. Therefore, I am the one person of all the people you could meet for whom that's not possible. Because if you drive me into a corner, I would run away or I would do many things, but I wouldn't be violent again. Because the thing I've learned is that that's not the way, that's not the answer.
Part of what happened to you, the way you were explaining it before, was giving yourself this sense of control, being in control. Is that still the case now?
The love of a good woman has changed me even in that respect, that I don't need to control.
How would you like to be remembered, Cecil?
As a good father.
Cecil Meneilly, a man whose life story is far from ordinary. I'm Donna Traynor, and thank you for watching.